Christian Reed. This is Crowline Publishing, part 2 of Fantasy Superheroes. Last time we talked about creating an aesthetic and some details to look out for, because you can't just import superheroes into a fantasy world. You can't just make fantasy superheroes. But now we need to examine a bit more closely the actual structure of what a superhero campaign within a D&D world might actually look like. Now, the first thing before we begin is that roughly there's 3 modes that superheroes exist in. Street level, what we'll just call supers, and cosmic level. Cosmic level is your super Silver Surfers, your Green Lanterns, some Supermans, Guardians of the Galaxy and certain takes of them. Stuff that takes place often in space and has very, very powerful characters and huge odds. This is, a giant vampire is draining the galaxy's blood. Go and sort it out. This is, look, Galactus is going to destroy all those planets. Go and sort it out. It happens within a context that is very, very removed from just regular superhero stuff. It's much more high-powered, and it's also much more science fictional. So while we'll get to kind of roughly analogous superhero situations, generally speaking, it's outside the scope of fantasy. So we're going to push cosmic superheroes to the side for now. So then there's street level, and then there's what we'll just call supers. We're going to deal with street level first because it's very, very simple. Street level heroes, very easy to do now. Without getting too far into this, superheroes basically came out of what we now call pulp heroes. So guys like the Shadow and the Aviator and Spider and people like that. What's his name? Doc Bronze? Man of Bronze? You know what I'm talking about. And these were much more men's adventure characters. And so they then transferred pretty seamlessly into the 1930s first superheroes. That's why you've got Batman is running around with a gun and a cape and he's hanging dudes, and that eventually becomes what we now call the modern superhero. And coming out of that tradition, Daredevil, Huntress, Question, all those guys. Just type in street level superheroes if you don't know what I'm talking about. But generally speaking, it's much more vigilante based. It's much more about dealing with crime rather than science fictional or supernatural elements. There's not all that much emphasis on Batman, for example, going into space or dealing with angels or vampires. It does happen, and some street level heroes, like, as I said before, my man Moon Knight, he specializes in kind of mixing those genres. But generally, crime is what you want to look at. Crime, criminals, that sort of more relatable, less supernatural element. And that is very, very easy to do within a fantasy world. It doesn't matter if you're playing a brooding urban hero who's overlooking the docks with your cloak in the night breeze flapping. If you're going, I must look out for this heroin dealer, or if you're going, I must look out for this evil cult of beholder worshippers, it's still ultimately the same sort of principles. And that's actually fairly easy to adapt. It's just a few things that you need to prepare before you go into the actual campaign. The first is you want to keep things pretty low level. You don't want to have a lot of 17th level warlocks running around. You don't want a lot of high level clerics. You don't want a lot of high level wizards. You need to keep magic and that aspect of D&D, the more high fantasy aspects, to a minimum. You want to have character classes at a minimum. Generally speaking, NPCs are not going to have character levels. They might have powers or something, but they're just dudes. They're just ordinary men and women. And what makes your PC special, what makes them super, is the class level. You want to avoid too many supernatural character classes. So you want to watch out for warlocks, at least at low levels. You want to watch out for sorcerers. You want to watch out for wizards, clerics. You can still have them. It's just that you want to place an emphasis on martial arts, on investigation, not so much just solving all your problems with magic like you do at 4th or 5th level D&D. You want to put the emphasis on investigation, on crime, on dealing with people, on following up leads, on having a large base of informants and suspects and stoolies and pigeons and people that you know. And if you've been to the docks once before and you know that that's where all the weird cultists like to hang out, you go there again because maybe there's a lead, as opposed to just going, oh, I talked to the gods. Are the drugs there? Yes. Dang. So keep your player characters, if you can, towards the more martial classes. So you want to put an emphasis on fighter, barbarian, maybe ranger, urban ranger, sort of, monk, bard. And then later on, as your PCs grow in level and grow in strength, they're probably going to multi-class into sorcerer or whatever. This is a good time for you to reskin those abilities as tools, gadgets, techniques. Charm Person becomes like the Shadow's Girasol ring, his opal, which gives him the power to cloud men's minds. Disguise Self, Disguise Kit, you become the Woman of 1,000 Faces. Fog Cloud and Grease become alchemical tools to aid with your getaways and your breaking into villains' villas. Magic Missiles become shurikens, playing cards, darts, bat-shaped metal stuff that you chuck at people's heads. Bane is a big scary Batman entrance. Hold Person, maybe it's just a bolo that you throw and tie dudes up with, or maybe it's trick arrows with nets, or karate darts. Healing magic, maybe it's meditation techniques that you learn from your martial arts masters, or maybe it's your own alchemical solution. And the reason that you want to keep things feeling and narratively and reskin them as less magical and more technological, more tool using, more gadgetsy is a good word, that keeps you feeling more like a superhero. And that means that when fantasy stuff happens, when you meet more fantastic supernatural elements that are more D&D, there's a much sharper contrast between your regular D&D characters and your street level D&D superhero characters. So when you meet the Dark Elf Cleric or the Sargon Mage or whatever, you feel much more like you are encountering a more fantastic creature. PCs feel like superheroes in a magical world if they don't have much in-game narrative magic. Something else to think about is, do these characters kill people? D&D characters kill more people than bloody polio, but superheroes traditionally have been for kids and they have needed to sell things. They have been basically advertising mascots since the 1940s. So, generally speaking, Batman no longer, as he once did, takes a Nazi, kills him, and then flies around Gotham City with the body dangling from the bat plane. Doesn't happen very much anymore. Probably a bit sad. But do you? Do you have animated Batman or do you have Zack Snyder Batman? How do your characters deal with killing people? You don't have any restrictions. It's up to you. But that being said, it's just one of the genre constraints that you should be aware of before you go into a game like this. The last and the most important part for any DM is what kind of adventures are these characters going to go on? What are they going to do? And that's pretty easy. First of all, you want to have them come together in an easy alliance because they're all going to be sort of dark and edgy characters. So you've got to give them, generally speaking, a reason to be together. Maybe some of them are partners like Hawk and Dove and Batman and Robin. Maybe some of them are grim loners that learn they really need to work together to turn the tide against the endless horde of crime. And then you just watch shows like Daredevil and Arrow, and any kind of street-level vigilante urban show is an endless stream of ideas. Who kidnapped the mayor's daughter? Who kidnapped the duke's daughter? Who kidnapped the archduke's daughter? Who kidnapped the mage's daughter? Who kidnapped the cleric's daughter? Why is there a gang war going on the streets of downtown Ashemwell, whatever you're going to call your fantasy city? Who's flooding the streets with drugs? Why is there a new weird cult in the city? Why is there a new weird vigilante who's horribly brutal in the city? Any kind of show will give you a good idea and an endless source of adventures. There's a few other things that you want to do. You do want to take some time to work out your city. There is thousands and thousands of city workbooks out there. I highly recommend you grab one or two of those and have a think about them. I actually like the Dresden Files city making techniques. If you've ever read that RPG, I'm not a fan of the books, but I do like the RPG. So you're going to have a think about that as a tool. There was a city workbook for 2nd edition D&D that I recall using quite fondly. Using those with an emphasis on crime and an emphasis on the mysterious, shadowy forces that operate beneath the city, above the city, political influence, and who owes what and who makes money how. Monty Cook's told us, and it had some fantastic urban weirdness within D&D. I would recommend stealing ideas from Warhammer Fantasy, like the Skaven. You should have a look at clockpunk technology and steampunk technology as well. Creating these sort of urban fantasy spaces and then allowing your characters to create alter egos and fight crime and deal with the forces of darkness that threaten to destroy stability and order within the city. It's pretty easy. It's pretty fun. It's a good way to run a D&D campaign. So street level heroes for D&D, not that hard. You should get into it. You should try it out. I've done it a few times and I've had a blast every single time. Do you know that if you press the like button, that tells YouTube that you have engaged with this content and you think it's tops, and they will algorithm me. And that's good for me, because I don't want to have a proper job anymore. I want to do this stuff full time. Give us a like. Why don't you subscribe? Go on. Next time, we're going to do proper supers. Proper high-level superheroes in fantasy. See ya.